Landboards presents Raspberry Pi GPIO cards. Landboards has a large variety of GPIO cards for the Raspberry Pi. Our cards have 3-pin GVS connectors for each signal line. GVS is ground, VCC and signal, which makes it much easier to distribute power and ground to I/O connections. One thing to deal with is that Raspberry Pis have 3.3 volt GPIO pins, and many I/O chips are 5 volts. Most of our boards include 3.3 volt to 5 volt bi-directional translation. The Raspberry Pis come in two different GPIO connector types. Older Raspberry Pis come with a 26-pin GPIO connector. Newer Raspberry Pis, such as the B+, Raspberry Pi 2, Raspberry Pi 3, A+, and the Raspberry Pi Zero all come with the 40-pin connector. So to recap, there's some basic questions to ask when you're selecting your I/O card for a Raspberry Pi. Do you see a need for 5 volt I/O in the present or in the future? Do you need a 26-pin connector or a 40-pin connector? And finally, do you want the I/O card to provide power to external circuits? Cards designed for the older Raspberry Pis with the 26-pin connector will work on cards with 40-pin connectors, but the reverse is not true. Landboard supplies a good variety of 26-pin I/O cards for the Raspberry Pi. These cards do work with either 40 or 26-pin Raspberry Pis. Our first card is the Raspi GVS. It provides 16 lines of 5 volts GVS I/O. The UART, I2C, and SPI connections are brought out to individual pins in their own connector. The RPIO Tiny doesn't provide any 5 volt translation, but it does bring all of the 26-pin GPIO pins out to GVS connectors. It also provides a polysilicon resettable fuse, as most of our cards do. The RPIO Tiny 3 card is similar to the RPIO Tiny, except that instead of straddling the 26-pin connector, the GVS pins are all on the inside of the card. The RPIO Tiny 2 brings all the Raspberry Pi's 26 pins GPIO connections out to GVS connectors. It also provides a configurable 8-bit 5 volts to 3.3 volt translator, so any of the particular pins from the Raspberry Pi can be converted up to 8 bits worth. Landboards has a variety of 40-pin Raspberry Pi GPIO cards. These pins require a 40-pin Raspberry Pi, one of the newer generation cards. We believe we were the first company to come out with a GPIO card for the Raspberry Pi Plus kind of cards, the 40-pin connector cards. This is the original card. The Raspi Plus GVS provides 16 bits of 5 volt I/O connections. The rest of the connections are brought out to GVS pins and are the 3.3 volt level. There are two versions of this card, one with and one without external DC connection to power the GVS. The Raspi Plus GVS config card has an 8-bit 5 volt to 3.3 volt level translator. The card also has a hat, EEPROM, making it a true Raspberry Pi hat. The RPP UIO 16 provides 16 lines of configurable 5 volts to 3.3 volt level translation. There's a terminal block for connecting external 5 volts into the card. There's a hat E2PROM on the card, so the card is a true Raspberry Pi hat. And of course, all of the GPIO pins on the 40-pin connector are brought out to GVS connectors on the card. We also have a console card in several different options of connectors. This particular one is the USB mini connector. We also have a USB micro connector version. The card has transmit and receive LEDs on it, and it lets you connect up to your Raspberry Pi from the serial port on your computer. Plugs directly in there so you can boot and do other things without having an Ethernet connection, without having a display, any of those. It's very good for development and for taking and showing your board to people without having all that infrastructure you have to bring along with you. The RPI MDI card provides 3 channels of servo outputs. It has 2 LEDs, which are servo or PWM outputs, and it has 3 input lines which can connect to switches or could be used as output pins. The RPI I2C hub card provides 4 channels of I2C on separated buses. It also has good power flexibility, so the I2C buses can run at different volts, either 5 volts or 3.3 volts, separately from each other and from the Pi. Our RPP sock is a programmable system on a chip card that supports 3.3 volts and 5 volt I/O. It's the most flexible and powerful card. It includes an ARM3 processor inside of it, as well as configurable digital and analog circuitry. The RPI PWR card is used to move the power connector into the volume of the Raspberry Pi and power the Raspberry Pi from a USB connector. It provides fuse protected power as well as an LED that can be written to from the processor. The Pi ATX also provides recessed power. In addition, it provides a connector that allows the ATX case, buttons and LEDs to be connected up to the Raspberry Pi GPIO lines. It also has the same controllable LED on it. If you want more information, you can see our wiki pages for these products, and we have YouTube videos on them as well. We have a store in Tindy where we sell all of these cards. Thanks for watching our video, and if you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.